sermon is called, "It is as you say." Now, you can do things the easy way or the hard way. Jesus, in this case, chose to do it the easy way. He put it all out in the open. If he was saying, if you want to charge against me, here it is. I claim to be the King of the Jews. I couldn't make it any easier for you to convict me. This is pretty simple. Pilate didn't have to ask any more questions of him. Now, when I say that, on the surface, that's what it appears to be. Jesus is making it easy. He's knowing he's going to the cross. He's going to make it really simple. But what if we said, well, is that really what's happening here? Is he really making it that easy? Is this what Jesus would do? And you've heard of those bracelets they had, "What would Jesus do?" WWJD. Well, would Jesus make it so easy for him? It was almost as if he was committing suicide. Everyone has heard accounts of people who commit suicide by police officer. They stand in front of a police officer with a gun, never intending to shoot him, but allow the policeman to shoot him. Or they drive their car in front of a transport truck and commit suicide by transport truck. Or they commit suicide other ways. They stand in front of a train. Well, all those are very selfish things to do. And if you look at this and you say to yourself, would Jesus commit suicide by Pilate? Would he make it so easy that Pilate had no choice? In the commentaries it says that if he did some of these things, Pilate would have no choice but to say, "You're guilty, you go to the cross." And he would just go like that. "That's done, let's go on to the next thing." So as I was thinking about that, I was talking to Chad about this sermon title, and he said, "It is as you say." What translation did that come from? And I said, well, it's the NASB, the New American Standard Version. And he looked at me like strangely, and he said, well, the translation I use says it a different way. "You have said it." And I thought, that's a strange way. Pilate says, "Are you the King of the Jews? And you have said it." Well, I looked at 15 different translations, and there's 3 different ones that come up. "It is as you say," "Yes, I am," or "You have said it." And I said, these are the same answer, just translated different. Matthew has said this in Hebrew, and we've translated it this way. Well, the commentaries say it's not kind of like, "You bet your boots I am." It's a more cryptic answer. It's more something that Pilate would have to think about. You see, they're saying that if he said, "Yes, I am," well, it really isn't right. And if he said no, that's not right either. Because Jesus is fully God and he is perfect, he's not going to tell a lie. So in a way, what he's saying to Pilate is said in such a way that Pilate says, "Wait a minute, what am I hearing here?" Because if he had said, "Yes, I am," or "No, I'm not," there's 2 ways to look at it. If he said, "No, I'm not the King of the Jews," well, of course he is the King of the Jews. He's the King of everything. He created all things. And if he said no, well, he is, so it's a lie. If he said yes, he's putting a picture in Pilate's head that's not the right picture. Pilate is thinking this is a political position. And so, in either way he said it, he had to do in such a way that Pilate would say, "I have to ask more questions." Because Jesus wouldn't want him to make this decision in such a way that he would be forced into it. And then he would carry the guilt of making this decision that wasn't his. Because to commit suicide by Pilate would seem to be unfair to Pilate. I didn't have a choice. And so, you see, sometimes Pilate would have a death sentence to give to somebody, and it would be easy. He's a horrible criminal. It's a death sentence. It's easy. But why? It wouldn't be easy to do it for a good man who's selfless and kind and good and gentle and has done all these kind and good things that no one else has been able to do. Like, who does miracles? Who does healings and raises people from the dead? Who does those things? And I'm going to send them to the cross. Well, you see, if Jesus made him think about all of these things, and he did it, he would have to disregard all of those things, and it would have to be his decision, and he would take responsibility for it entirely. And Pilate knew all sorts of things about him. He knew he had lots of followers. He had people who followed him that had given up good jobs to do it. They would hang on his every word. He would know, Pilate would know he'd done all these miracles. He would know about the Palm Sunday triumphal entry where people had called him the King of the Jews. And if he didn't know all these things, like the fact that the religious leaders hated him and wanted to have him arrested, he wasn't doing his job properly to make sure that the country flowed along and didn't go into rebellion. Now, he may have even been expecting that eventually Jesus would come before him because he knew that the wheels would turn eventually and the chief priest would bring him if they didn't do the work themselves. Well, in the last two sermons, I made a point that the religious leaders had a sacred obligation to figure out who Jesus was. Connect the dots. And Mary, they could have went to Mary and asked her about her son, and she could have relayed the fact that he'd been born in Bethlehem and that he'd gone to the temple and met with Simeon and Anna, and that the wise men had come and that they had to go to Egypt, and that Jesus had spent 3 days in the temple when he was 12. And if they had heard all these things, and they had said, well, we know all the prophecies about the coming Messiah, do any of these connect? And was he really the long-awaited Messiah? Well, Pilate, on the other hand, he didn't care about any of these things that were to do with Jewish history or prophecy. He would only be interested if it posed a threat to the Roman Empire and if it would make him look bad if he didn't deal with it. Because all of this was basically a stepping stone for him to get a higher position and leave this horrible back country place that was not an easy place to rule. And I said that he would have to think about this and take all the responsibility, and he should have. But if you remember, if you go down to verse 24, it says, when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves. In spite of the fact that Jesus was making it available, all the information, so he would have to make a decision for himself, he still didn't want to take that responsibility. So let's look at the text. Well, number one is the burning question. In verse 11a, it says, Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? This is the most important question. This is really the only question that's important, because later on they accuse him of all sorts of things, and Pilate wouldn't have cared if he'd eaten grain on Sunday or the Sabbath, or wouldn't care about any of these things. That's up to you. You judge him yourself under your own laws. No, he would care about if he was going to be the king of the Jews. Well, he probably knew about the triumphal entry, and he knew the main accusation they had against him is he claims to be the new king of the Jews, which would be a great problem. And see, the problem here is not that that the Jewish leaders were saying, well, this guy, this Jesus is the Messiah. They didn't want to think that. They didn't want to even go there. They just wanted to make sure that this guy who might be seen by others as the Messiah, they wanted to make sure he got done away with so that they wouldn't lose their place and their position. Remember what I said about Jesus was making sure it was impossible for him to be forced into this himself. He had to make this decision on his own. In verse 11b, it says, and Jesus said to him, it is as you say. Well, that answer came too easy. You know, when a shrewd person, we all pick up the phone and it says, this is Canada Revenue Agency and you're going to go to jail, we say, I don't think so. Click. We're shrewd enough to know that that's just too simple. And he was very shrewd and understanding, and he would say, wait a minute, alarm bells are going off. This should be harder. And Jesus said it in such a way that if Pilate said it was a cross, it would be a charge he would have to live with himself. And you know that Pilate is going to kneel before Jesus in eternity because every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God. And so he's going to have to explain why he chose to do it in this way and not another way. Well, number 3 is verse 12 to 14. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Now, when you hit this thing, something like this happens, he would understand that the religious leaders were equally as shrewd as he was. And he didn't trust them, and he didn't like them. And he was saying, there's got to be something going on more than what I'm seeing. And what's this all about? There's more here than meets the eye. And he's fairly screaming the words, Jesus, bring on your A game. Do your best or you're going to get what they want. You're going to go to the cross. You've got to step it up. There's a movie I watched. It's a great movie called Ford versus Ferrari. And Ford is at the Le Mans race. And they have 3 F40 cars. And they're going to win the Le Mans race. And one driver who is now, it's the 24 hours is almost over. It's the last hour. He's 3 laps ahead of every other car. He's going to win hands down as long as he keeps it between the ditches. And so Ford says, no, 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 no. I want you to slow down so the all 3 Ford cars will pass that finish line all together, one after another, bang, bang, bang. And he's doesn't want to do this, but he understands that that's who he works for, and they say to do this. What he doesn't understand is he's being taken for a chump. Because the way the Le Mans works is everybody lines their car up in a line like this. The driver runs across, gets in his car, tries to start out without running into another car, and the first one across the line wins, except for the fact that if you started back here, 300 feet back, you get to go across the track up to 300 feet later and still win. And so the guy that won across the tracks first, who was 3 laps ahead, he started near the front and the other cars started near the back. And so Ford wanted the pretty boy, the good-looking guy, the good spokesman for Ford to win, so they wanted this picture taken. They robbed him. He won. Well, Jesus is wanting to make sure that Pilate is wanting to make sure that this doesn't happen to him. He doesn't get robbed of justice. He wants to make sure that the right thing happens. He's afraid that this poor person is going to be railroaded by smarter people. But the funny thing, of course, is that there's no one smarter than Jesus. He knew exactly what was going on. And as Pilate talks to him, he understands that this is not any normal man. Well, at the start of the sermon, I made the distinction. I told you that it's answers in three different ways. There's the straight up yes, and there's the more cryptic, this is not as simple as it sounds kind of answer. So Jesus is letting Pilate think deeply on this topic. And there's another couple more reasons other than the fact that first one I told you. The first one is that Jesus loves him, and he knows he's going to be judged about this decision by everyone throughout history. For the next 2,000 years, people are going to judge Pilate on what he said and did in this trial. And he wants to give him every possible chance to get it right, to do it right. If Jesus had done it another way, it would have been suicide by Pilate. But he wanted to make sure that Pilate got every opportunity to do the right thing. Now, the second possibility is Jesus is merciful and doesn't want him to make a mistake. Have you ever gotten that call from Bell Alliant or Rogers and they say, because you're such a great customer, we're going to give you these 3 or 2 or 5 free channels, and you, oh, that's great, and they tell you all what good things are going to be and all the benefits, and what they don't tell you until the end is, yeah, but after 2 months, you get to pay $19.95 a month from then on. They want you to just don't think about it. Just grab this opportunity for all it's worth and then not even notice when the bill comes in with more money on it. Well, see, Jesus was trying to give him a chance in the other way. Think deeply on this. Think about the consequences. Don't make a snap decision that you're going to regret from now on. One that there will be no backing away from. You see, we often form opinions that aren't based on fact. Opinions that make it easier for us to live on earth without guilt. If we think about things too deeply, they're going to force us somewhere where your mind doesn't want to go. There's a man named Ray Comfort. He runs a ministry called Living Waters. But he goes and witnesses to people on the street. He's a street preacher. And he video records these and puts the interaction with the people on YouTube. So one of the things he does is he talks to people and he brings them a book out like this. It's a beautiful pictures. There's pictures of people, of nature and animals, and it's beautiful. And he says, how do you think we got all these things? And most people will say, well, they evolved. It's evolution. Evolution gave us this beauty. And the reason they say that is evolution doesn't ask us anything. It's all random. It's totally unguided. Things happen by chance over time. And so that's how these things happen. And so most people are answered that way. And then he says, well, have you heard of DNA? Well, everyone's heard of DNA. It's I won't say the dioclect, whatever the long word is, but DNA. And he said, you know that if you stretch out a person's DNA in a straight line, it will travel to the sun and back, and to the sun and back, and a long way. 93 million miles each way. And he said, and if there's a small mistake in your DNA, then it makes bad things happen. That small mistake may cause cancer or cataracts or all sorts of things. And he said, and it's hard to believe that all of those things came by chance. And then he picks up the book again and he says, you look at this book. There's a bird flying. And do you think this book happened by chance? Do you think the wood fibers came together with the nice white dye, and then all these pictures and the words and ink came together to make this beautiful? Well, everybody says no. Somebody had to create that book. And he said, but that's really simple compared to DNA. How can you say DNA came by accident and this book didn't? Well, he's got them, right? They say, well, yeah, there had to be a creator. You know, but the problem is that only gets you part way. So you have to know, well, who is that creator? Well, when Jesus said that what he said, it is as you say, he's asking Pilate to think very carefully on who he is. Because they know he did things that miracles. He's asking him to think deeply on who that is. And see, they had lots of gods. So which God is it? Pilate had this information about who he was. And he was an extremely good man, which are very rare. And he met the religious leaders and he knew they weren't good. And he knew that this wasn't something political, because if Jesus was a political figure, the crowds would have been calling for his release, not calling for his crucifixion. And he knew that he wasn't doing it to get rich, because he wasn't rich. So his claims of being, yes, I'm the Messiah, but not as you think, it's another way. I'm not the king, but I am. Well, eventually, he is going to be on trial, and so are we. And we're going to be asked the question by God the Father, who he asked everybody this, what did you do with my son? Well, Ray Comfort, if he convinced that those people that he was speaking to, that not only did the book have a creator, but we had a creator, then he's got them part way down the road. But then he has to figure out who. Because as I say, Rome had lots of gods. And this book was, Jim Beverly wrote this book in 2004. It's religions, A to Z. So there's 100 different religions in here. 100 different paths who we can pick to be the God that created us. So I'm going to spend about a minute each on 3 of these. Now, Islam is Muslims, and somebody said, well, Muhammad is their representative, and Jesus is the representative for Christianity, and how do they compare, and who comes out ahead? Well, I'm not going to read this to you, but just take my word for it. Jesus came out way ahead of Muhammad. In the Quran, they acknowledge that Jesus is a prophet, just like Muhammad is a prophet, and they build on what he did. But the problem is, the Quran talks a lot about Jesus, but they get every single thing about him wrong. And the Quran was given to Muhammad by the Archangel Gabriel. And who was sent by God, and you'd think God would know about Jesus. God the Father would know. and he relay it, but everything is wrong, and that's a problem. Well, Hinduism is a really big religion too. And so how does it stand up? Well, Krishna is kind of their main god, their personal god, their Jesus. And they have lots of stories about these gods. There's 30 of them, and they have lots of stories, but they don't stand up historically. When you talk about Jesus, there's lots of information that prove that he's a historic figure. There's a guy called A.J. Bashan. He's the world's greatest scholar on India and its religions, and he says there's no proof at all of the historical reality of Krishna. And you think about Hinduism, they have what's called the caste system. Now the caste system, there's 5 castes, lower and lower. The last caste is called the Untouchables. Well, when he wrote this book in 2004, he says there's 250 million untouchables in India. Now, think about this. An untouchable is a person who has done something so horrible in a previous life that no one wants to be associated with them. No one can touch. You cannot touch somebody from another caste. And that's horrible. Because there's no fix for it. The only thing you can do is, as an untouchable, is live a good life so that the next life you won't be an untouchable. And think of it this way. Suppose 2 untouchables who can only marry each other because they can't marry into the other caste have a child. And a beautiful baby is being held in their hands. And they say, she's so beautiful. He's so beautiful. And you have to realize that this baby that they're holding in their arms is a horrible, despicable person who is only an untouchable because of something horrible they've done. And how do you connect those two things? Well, Buddhism is also a religion with many followers, but Buddhism doesn't have a Jesus figure. They don't have a God at all. And Buddha is not worshipped, but all of the things that are written about Buddha are just guesswork. There's really nothing. It's gotten good press lately because of the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama said this: if you are struck by lightning, which is the most random thing possible, right? If you're struck by lightning, it's your fault. It's karma. It's got it. There you go. Now, you've heard that expression. Well, how's that working out for you? Well, in Thailand, 93% of the people are Muslim. So it's almost entirely Muslim. And they have a huge problem with prostitution. It's been illegal for years, but every year the funds generated through illegal prostitution is more funds than the entire gross national product of Thailand. And it's been going on for 500 years. And you think to yourself, how are all these women and children, and they start them at 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, how are all these women and children, what bad karma did they have to have this horrible thing happen to them? Well, think of that, and then think of the verse we read earlier. Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take your yoke upon me and learn from me, and I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Would not a little girl who was 11 years old, who's been taken away from her parents and sold into slavery as a sex slave, wouldn't she say, give me some of that? Compare it to being struck by lightning and it's your fault. Compare it to one when the Dalai Lama said it's your fault. Compare it to 1 in 4 Hindus are untouchable simply because they're born into a caste system that paints them that way and there's no escape for them. Compare it to Allah, who can be served all your life. You can serve Allah all your life, but the main thing about him is he's unknowable. So there's no one who knows if you've done good enough. Have I served Allah faithfully enough to go to him, or will I be destroyed? Because I'm not good enough and there's no way to know. Jesus did it all. He paid for our sins on the cross. See, God is righteous and he demands full payment for our sins, and he understands that we can't pay them ourselves, but he sent Jesus to earth to be our payment, so that he is in perfect man could pay for our sins. Well, Jesus was doing that work as he stood before the high priest and as he stood before Pilate, and then he went to the cross, and then he rose again to prove to us for sure that it was all real and it was complete. Well, you compare that to the work that's demanded by the other religions. And it's never enough to please their God. It's never enough. And they have no promise of a light burden, and rest is not even something that's suggested. In their religion, there's no rest for the wicked. And it's never good enough. Well, when Jesus said, "It is as you say," he meant that I am not like those other religions. I am the one true God. I am the one who saves you from your sins. That's why we practice this communion. We remember that God did fulfill everything. He did make all of these promises